Greetings and salutations. It is I, Mr. Nothing, the museum curator of the weird and the strange, and the host who has been locked in a building basement because the local townspeople believe it benefits their town for me to be suffering. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today it is Short Story Tuesday, and I want to talk about a short story that features a utopia, sacrifice, and feelings of shame and justification and stuff like that. I am talking about The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas by Ursula K. Le Guin. This one was recommended to me by Lucas over at the Bits of Lit, and as usual, it's a good recommendation from him. He and I have similar tastes, so when he thinks something is really good, it's usually pretty awesome. So for those that don't know, Ursula K. Le Guin, I expect a lot of people already know who she is. She is a science fiction-y type of author, fantasy, that sort of thing. Speculative fiction, as it is called. She's been writing for years upon years. She's won a lot of awards for her work, very acclaimed author. Has written literary criticisms, poetry, short stories, and novels. You may recall that I focused on, I want to read The Wizard of Earthsea, a book of hers in 2021. But I figured, why not get a little early experience with how she writes. So that's why I decided to check out this short story at this point in time. So yeah, she seems like a pretty big deal in the literary world. Maybe one of the more important authors of the 1900s, late 1900s, which is good because I'm always looking for more of those authors. It's hard to really determine who's the big cheese in the late 1900s, just because we're still coming off the aftermath of that time. We haven't really narrowed down the list of books to what's important and what's trash. Although I would argue that no book is really trash, but that's beside the point. So, without further ado, let's talk about The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. I'll do a little summary, a little analysis, and we will move on from there. The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas focuses on the city of Omelas, and it's being we're being guided through it by an omniscient, sort of anthropologist-like narrator who is just describing the city to us. The way they describe it, it is kind of paradise. The people are happy. No one seems to be in want of anything, at least from the initial description. The city draws lots of tourists, so it seems to be making money. And they also have a yearly festival which draws in those tourists. There's good food, a lot of celebration. Things seem to be going pretty well for the people of Omelas. However, the story then veers sharply to the left as the narrator describes a child who has been locked away in a basement in one of the bigger city, or one of the buildings of the city. People know that this child is there. Some people frequently visit the child or check out the child for the first time. And the narrator notes that this child's misery in some way produces an overall benefit for Omelas. It's what allows Omelas to function as a paradise or a utopia for the other people. The narrator doesn't really know how it's connected, but they do know that there appears to be some sort of correlation there. As I mentioned before, people know about the child, but they do nothing. Some of them visit the child, acknowledge it, and move on. Even the visiting tourists seem to know that the child exists, but they don't really, do anything beyond, acknowledging that child is there. Some people cry, others do far more, and I'll get to that in just a moment. Some people attempt to offer justifications like, oh, the peace and prosperity that the city has can't exist without this child suffering, so the child must suffer. Others go even further and say that they could free the child, but the child has been sort of languishing so long, and that they couldn't possibly be a regular member of society anymore. So that, which seems to be a harsher justification, because you're saying like, oh, this child can't. It's been too long, so we can't possibly free this child. Well, you can just let the child live on the fringes of society. I don't know. That's beyond the point, though. The narrator then finally notes that some people grow silent after seeing the child, and they leave Omelas. They are the ones who walk away from Omelas, essentially leaving paradise. The narrator doesn't know why they leave Omelas, but the people themselves do, going off to distant lands, and that's where the story there. The story ends there, possibly on a high note, but maybe also kind of a neutral note. In terms of analysis, Ursula Le Guin touches upon the idea of utopia in this story. She presents to you the city of Omelas, a perfect place, a peaceful place, one that has everything that it needs, one that leaves no citizen in want. Except for that one child who is locked in the basement, who is living in their own filth and squalor, and seems to be getting, no attention and no communication, no love that a child would probably need at whatever age that child is. So you have to wonder, is it truly a utopia if one person is suffering? There's only one person suffering. The narrator does not know that there's any other people in this town who are locked in basements. So there's only one child suffering. Is it still a utopia then? Personally, I would argue no, it is not utopia, because a utopia, paradise, requires that everybody be satisfied and have all their needs taken care of. And so there's just one person who is not doing well, and that automatically nullifies any sense of utopia. It doesn't matter if the crops are growing well, or the city is making money off tourism. Like, none of that matters if that one child is suffering. This sort of presents a utilitarianism perspective, where Le Guin is arguing the misery of one, as long as it benefits the many, is okay. I don't think Le Guin is condoning this. She's just presenting a scenario, but it's still interesting how this seems to be a rejection, or maybe just a view of what utilitarianism is, simply showing that the benefit of the suffering of the one benefits the overall, then a lot of people are going to agree that that's necessary. But it's also kind of damning, because that one child is still suffering. They can't partake in any of this goodness, because their sole misery is required for the benefit of this town, which is a lot to think about. And I urge you all to think about it too. It certainly struck me as I was reading the story. Related to that, I really like how Le Guin contrasts the beauty of Omelas with the suffering of this child, because initially the narrator describes this beautiful city, and it sounds so great, and I want to live there, and it's wonderful. And then it just veers sharply left. Like, within another paragraph, the narrator is talking about this child in this horrid situation where nothing seems to be going well for them, and how nobody seems to be doing anything about it, despite the fact that they know it's there. And it's such a contrast. Like, I would think that suffering kind of negates any of the beauty of the city, but the citizens don't feel that way, and so you have to wonder what's going on with those citizens. That seems kind of unfortunate for the child, that none of them seem to care. A lot to think about there as well. Another interesting thing about this short story is I really think there's an unreliable narrator present in this story, because the narrator pops up. They appear to be omniscient, sort of taking an anthropologist kind of take on everything, describing the city in a way that they seem to know about what's going on, and understanding the culture around them, understanding why all of this is happening, especially with the child who's locked in the basement and is miserable. But there's something that the narrator says that gave me, caused me to pause and reflect on like what was actually happening in this story, and maybe I'm thinking too much about it, but I'd like to read this to you. They did not use swords or keep slaves. They were not barbarians. I do not know the rules and laws of their society, but I suspect they were singularly few, as they did without monarchy and slavery. So they also got on without the stock exchange, the advertisement, the secret police, and the bomb. And so the narrator is describing the society, the Omelas particularly, what's going on there. But they seem to be an outsider looking in. So what's especially striking is that the narrator says they don't know about the laws or customs of the society, which is weird because that kind of calls into question everything they're seeing. Because if they see this festival but they don't know what's going on, do they really know? Can you really trust anything they say about the rest of the story? They're kind of ignorant in a way of the society. You have to wonder if there's truly a child locked in a basement, or if they're making this up, or if they simply saw a child in a basement and were like, "Oh, that must mean something for the rest of society," and it's not just an indicator of bad parents or something like that. It's a weird kind of thing for the narrator to just admit. You could argue that since they're an outside observer, maybe this is a rival culture, and they're saying, "Oh, this society looks perfect," but there's actually one person who's suffering, and these people are actually terrible for having let that person to suffer. I'm probably reaching at that point, but I do think it's weird that the narrator notes that they don't know the laws or customs, even though they're describing this city and this child. Like they're either lying or they're it's a weird thing to admit on their part. So, just something to think about there as well. The last thing I want to talk about is the ending. Specifically, the ones who walk away from Omelas. Where are they going? It feels like an important piece of the story because the narrator notes that, a lot of people see the child but suffering, but they attempt to make justifications. However, there are a small number of people who see this child suffering and they grow silent. And then within a couple of days, they walk away from Omelas. They leave. The narrator doesn't know where they're going, but the people do. Where are they going? Are they going to a better place to hopefully make a better utopia that doesn't hinge on one person's suffering? Are they just simply going to another city because they don't want to be in Omelas anymore? Do they recognize that this is not paradise as it would be described, and this is actually kind of a terrible place because it requires suffering? What exactly they know, they're not telling other people. And so it does kind of confuse me a little bit. I'm not exactly certain what's going on. But one thing that does stand out to me is none of these people seem to be freeing the child before they leave. So you could argue that they're kind of condoning the behavior of this town by just leaving and not doing anything about this child. If they're going to make the world a better place, why aren't they starting with Omelas? They're just leaving, and they're leaving the child to suffer, and so it's very confusing and quite interesting with what Ursula Guin is trying to say here. You could also argue that she's painting a picture of our own society and turning it back towards us, because you see a lot of homeless children, and we often go to war with other countries to get their resources, so that we, like the Mideast, so we can better our own society. And maybe Le Guin is trying to argue that we say our society is top notch, but is it really top notch if it requires the suffering of the Mideast people in the Mideast? Or if we have our own suffering in society, such as homeless people and exploited workers, and we do nothing about it? It really makes you think, and the answer is, probably not. Any society that hinges on the suffering of one or multiple people has a lot of problems going on with it, at least in my opinion. And I think that's probably what Le Guin is arguing here. Definitely a lot to consider there. So yeah, those are my thoughts on The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, a quality short story, one of the better ones that I have featured on this channel. one that I would definitely recommend that you go and seek out so you can find and read it and enjoy it. Once you have read it, or if you want to comment below on something that I said, absolutely comment below. I would love to hear from you. Let's have a discussion about this interesting short story and the many questions that it raises. In the meantime, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that we can talk more about Ursula Le Guin and get her books and stories out to the masses. And until then, I wish you the best of luck and your weird and miserable travels. Farewell.